Professor Kyriakoudes, very nice to have you here. You're an historian.
Yes.
Currently working on history of cigarette use in the 20th century. How did you get interested in this subject, in tobacco?
Yes, I'm originally trained as a historian of urbanization and the economic history of the American South, which has a unique and interesting and divergent history from the rest of the country.
Mm-hmm.
But early in my career, in the late 1990s, the tobacco documents, formerly secret tobacco industry documents that document the fraud, the industry's suppression of knowledge of what they knew about smoking, risks and harms, and all of their marketing practices going back to the beginning of the modern cigarette industry. All of these documents, which had been not available to scholars and not public, were all of a sudden released to the public. And historians rely on evidence, documents, and so I found myself, as did many other scholars, facing a very compelling, very important story that gets at the essence of what modern life is about, that touches on health, that touches on economics and marketing and politics. And I had the tools now to tell that story, so I've been doing research in that for about the last 15 years.
Do you have an explanation why the public is still accepting the damage done by tobacco? And
I think it involves a number of different factors. One is I think the public still accepts the tobacco industry's basic proposition that smoking is an individual choice. There could, of all the falsehoods disseminated by the tobacco industry, that I think is the most dangerous and pernicious and one of the most blatantly untrue. And it's because if you look at the tobacco industry's business model, it's built on the recruitment of young people under the age of 18 into nicotine addiction, generally through cigarettes. The majority of people now don't smoke. There are restrictions on where you can smoke, generally no smoking indoors. So I think even in the public health community, in the medical profession, certainly in the regulatory apparatus of the health ministries in Europe, but also in the United States, in some quarters there's the thought that, well, we've solved the smoking problem. Only a fifth of our population smokes. Well, wait a minute, that's 1 out of 20 people. That's still creating an enormous cost of medical treatment and just human suffering. So it is a present problem that is not solved. So the primary injury, I think, is addiction. And that's where I disagree with the tobacco industry. They do not see addiction as an injury unto itself. I see that as a health injury. It robs a person of their free will. And so one proposal I think is, rather than make the cigarette illegal, to ban it, let's just not make it addictive. And there are ways that could happen. One could remove the nicotine. That's easy to do. Most cigarettes now are made with what's called reconstituted leaf. They take the tobacco, they chop it up, and much like the process of making paper, they extrude it through rollers and heat it a little bit, and then they put everything back in. So just don't put the nicotine back in. It's a water-soluble alkaloid. Or another problem with the cigarette that separates it from the cigar or some types of pipes is that it's inhalable. So let's just render the cigarette not inhalable. Now that wouldn't be a perfectly safe product. But
exactly, it wouldn't be.
Personally, I favor removing the addictive component. So let's just sell a nicotine-free cigarette. Then people could choose to smoke it or not at their leisure. One way to understand the way effective tobacco control policy would be to go to the website of British American Tobacco. And you can go to their website, bat.com, and look for the things that they don't like. They tell you, we don't like plain packaging. We don't want marketing behind the counter. We don't want
No,
our
sure.
products removed from displays.
Mhm.
Why is that? Because those are the
are-
remaining effective marketing tools that they have at hand. The industry can't be a partner in tobacco control because the reality is the goal is to move this industry to another business.
Mhm.
Because what they do is inherently dangerous and deadly by design. Tobacco is a political problem. It is not an individual problem.
Yeah.
We individualize it to our detriment in terms of effective policy making. It is a problem of politics and of political economy. And to the extent that cigarette manufacturers have influence in health ministries and in departments of commerce and those areas that regulate trade, they are going to advocate for as much as they can to sell their product,
Yeah.
and that it goes against health. It goes against the public interest. And so, you know, the industry it can't be counted as an effective partner because their interests are adverse
Yeah.
to that of the public's interest in being healthy.
Yeah.
I think the reason why JTI, Japan Tobacco International, and other manufacturers engage in these philanthropic works is to buy access and goodwill. But it also plays in a role in shaping public opinion of providing a positive image to the tobacco industry as a responsible partner. I disagree with that position.
Yeah.
I believe that they're not responsible.
For some years now, we don't have these campaigns here in the Netherlands. Do you think that's that we should have these campaigns again?
Yeah, I have effective health education on tobacco, effective anti-tobacco education among young people is absolutely essential. And there is an unfortunate assumption among policymakers and in fact the general public that the tobacco problem has been solved. And in fact it hasn't been solved because every year there's another generation of young people moving into the danger ages of nicotine addiction recruitment. And they don't know. They have to be taught. And so just like we have to teach them how to read, how to do mathematics, to teach them about history and the other subjects that they learn in school, they must have this tobacco education. It's anti-tobacco education, truthful and effective tobacco awareness is central for their lives. Because if they get caught up in the use of this product, if they succumb to the allure that the tobacco industry holds out in front of them, that this is a glamorous product, for many of them it will be a lifelong addiction and one that will cut their life short. So, you know, knowledge is not something that fills up in a bucket and then we can set it aside. It has to constantly be re-inculcated and re-educated into the population because people forget. New people come into the community, young people come into the population. For all these reasons, education is something that has to always be ongoing. And an effective anti-tobacco education, tobacco health education program is very important. They're engaged in education. The cigarette manufacturers engage in education. Every time they put up a sign, this is Marlboro or Kent or Lucky Strike, or send a point of purchase display to one of their retailers. That's a form of education, pro-tobacco education. There are cigarette industry documents in which, for example, a gentleman by the name of Claude Teague for R.J. Reynolds in the 1970s writes openly in a secret memoranda where they're planning their youth marketing strategies. He says, you know, we don't really need to worry about the warning label on cigarettes because young people, they like risk and danger and they think they're going to live forever. So I think effective tobacco control education involves denormalization of the industry. I think a frank and honest assessment of the way the industry has known for a long time that cigarettes were dangerous and addictive and yet has lied to the public about that. I think that's a very effective thing that young people can use to understand that this product really is kind of uncool and kind of a sucker's gambit. Because
you also see a difference between higher educated children and the lower ranges of education as well.
That's an important part of the tobacco story. You know, if you look at the use of cigarettes as an epidemic, I think of it as a broad epidemic that has social, political, economic components to it over the long term. I am a historian. In 1881, when the Bonsack cigarette machine was invented, hardly anybody smoked cigarettes. And in fact, for a long period of time, cigarettes were not a popular form of tobacco. No. People chewed tobacco, they used cigars and pipes, snuff and other products, but not the cigarette, which is engineered for addiction. The industry got behind it with marketing and developed that, and cigarette smoking rose. And in the beginning of the cigarette epidemic in the United States and here in Europe, cigarettes were seen as glamorous and prestigious. Yeah. And while, you know, we often don't think about this, is cigarettes required money. You know, you had to be able to buy 2 or 3 packs of cigarettes a day if you were a heavy smoker. Yeah. And so you had to have a certain level of income. Sure. And for many people, they didn't have that. So at the beginning of the cigarette epidemic, it's a prestige thing. Yeah. And then over the course of the 20th century, the higher income and higher educated groups began to abandon smoking as it became lodged in people who had less social advantage and less income and less education. The industry re-engineered their marketing. I call it the downscale downshift, and shifted into that low gear and has marketed their products to those people ever since. Yeah. You know, freedom is a good thing. I mean, I think the Netherlands, in some ways, has some very interesting and enlightened policies of kind of reduced harm towards vice. You know, let's regulate it and segregate it, and we know it's going to happen. You know, we can't make it go away, so we'll, you know, we have the coffee shop, we'll have these other tolerations, and that's good. But the problem is that the cigarette is not like, for example, marijuana, in that the cigarette is as addictive, perhaps more so than heroin, and other hard drugs, which the Dutch state actually does, you know, criminalize. We should think of the cigarette as having the same addictive qualities. That, I mean, that's the science, as these other hard drugs. Yeah, sure. And in terms of social costs and economic costs and healthcare costs, it dwarfs any of the costs created by those other drugs. And so that's the level of the problem. That's the kind of state policies I would advocate for in terms of restricting the prevalence of cigarette use in the population.
Now, you're an historian, but you're maybe not trained to see in the future, but in your opinion, will we see the end of tobacco in the near future?
I do. I think we're going to see the end of tobacco. There are a lot of the trends diminishing its use. The end of cigarettes, tobacco cigarettes. You know, which are a special category of tobacco. I think eventually, if we continue with good policies, we'll be able to reduce that to near zero. I don't think, though, we'll see the end of nicotine addiction, because we're at a juncture right now, and this is based in my own historical analysis. One of the things that I've learned from studying the history of the tobacco industry is that at each point where there's a major change in the technology of the delivery of addictive nicotine through tobacco and other products, that's remade the market. And so when the machine, the cigarette manufacturing machine that could mass produce cigarettes at very low cost was introduced in the 1880s, a revolution that made the modern form of the cigarette as a rod of paper. That eventually led to a widespread use of cigarettes. It took a while. In 1913, when the Camel cigarette was introduced by the R.J. Reynolds Company, which introduced the modern American blended cigarette, which was especially mild and particularly inhalable, and supported by mass marketing and mass advertising. That led to really the creation of the modern cigarette epidemic in its current form. Filters, light cigarettes and low tars come out when people were concerned about the science linking cigarettes to health. That changed the market. So now we're at a point where we have new nicotine delivery products, vaping systems, e-cigarettes, and those types of devices. And they're not regulated in the same way. No. And the cigarette manufacturers don't accept addiction as a harm. And so they don't want them regulated in the same way. But I think that's a real problem because addiction still is a harm, and that is its own
Sure.
injury to the body and to the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so what will happen as we move forward with these e-cigarettes and vaping products, these nicotine delivery products, is uncertain. But I think the public health community and public health officials, people in government health regulatory agencies, need to understand how damaging addiction is, and particularly nicotine addiction, which is itself, I mean, nicotine is not good for you.
No.
So it's not a harmless substance to be ingested into the body. And where we're going with that, I don't know. But I think we should be on guard because the past has shown that at these technological junctures, the industry has been able to either expand its business or maintain its business in the face of adverse forces.